With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement regarding the wider opening of nurseries, schools and colleges as part of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is now over 2.5 months since we asked schools, further education colleges and nurseries to remain open only for vulnerable children and those of critical workers. I continue to be immensely grateful for the way that our teachers and parents have responded to these challenging circumstances. I'd also like to say a very big thank you to all those working in education, childcare and children's social care for the huge efforts that they're making on a daily basis to support families and make sure our children don't miss out on their education. We all know how important it is for children and young people to be in education and childcare, and it is vital that we get them back there as soon as the scientific advice indicates that we can. I'm very pleased that last week we were able to take the first cautious step towards that. As the Prime Minister confirmed on the 28th of May, the government's 5 tests are being met, and we're beginning to ease the lockdown restrictions across England. Based on all the evidence, this means that nurseries and other early year providers, including childminders, have been able to welcome back children of all ages. Pupils in reception, Year 1 and Year 6, have been returning in smaller class sizes, alongside the children of critical workers and vulnerable children of all ages, who continue to be able to attend. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, 97% of schools that submitted data to the Department for Education were open at the end of last week. Last week, we saw the number of primaries taking nursery reception Year 1 or Year 6 pupils steadily rise as part of a phased, cautious, wider reopening of schools. By the end of the week, more than half of primary schools were taking pupils from these year groups, and as of yesterday, that had risen to over 70% of primaries that had responded. I know that schools need time to put in place the strict protective measures we have asked for, and we continue to work with the sector to make sure that any schools experiencing difficulties are supported to open more widely as soon as it is possible. Some schools in areas such as the Northwest are concerned about local rates of transmission. I can assure them that SAGE's estimate for the whole of the UK is below 1. If robust data shows that local action needs to be taken, we will not hesitate to do so, but we are not in that position. I know you'll be as impressed as I have been by the work and efforts of head teachers, teachers and childcare staff who are finding ways to make the necessary changes while still ensuring schools and nurseries are a welcoming place for children, as well as reassuring families who may be worried about sending their children back. The next step of our phased approach will enable secondary schools and colleges to provide some face-to-face support from the 15th of June for Years 10 and Years 12, and 16 to 19 students in the first year of a 2-year study programme who are due to take key exams next year. This is such a critical time for those students, and this extra support will be in addition to their remote education, which will continue to be the main method of education for them this term, as only a quarter of this cohort will be able to attend at any one time in order to limit the risk of transmission. Children of critical workers and vulnerable children in all secondary year groups will continue to be able to attend full-time. We have published guidance for secondary schools and ensured schools have the flexibility to decide how they want to use face-to-face support in the best interests of their pupils. Since the announcement of our proposals on the 10th of May, my department has published detailed guidance for settings on how to prepare. This includes planning guides for early years providers and for primary schools, and for further guidance for secondary schools and colleges as well. Crucially, we have provided detailed guidance on the protective measures that schools and other settings need to take to reduce the risk of transmission. This includes restricting class sizes, limiting mixing between groups, and encouraging regular hand washing and frequent cleaning. This advice was developed in close consultation with Public Health England. The safety of our children, young people and staff remains my top priority. That's why all staff and children, including the under fives, will have access to testing if they develop symptoms of coronavirus. This will enable the right response where a case is confirmed, including using a test and trace approach to rapidly identify people most at risk of having been exposed to the virus so that they can take action too. We continue to follow the best scientific advice and believe that this cautious, phased return is the most sensible course of action to take. While we are not able to welcome all primary children back for a full month before the summer, we continue to work with the sector on the next steps, where we'd like to see schools who have the capacity to bring back more children in those smaller class sizes, to do so if they are able to do before the summer holidays. We will be working to bring all children back to school in September. I know students who are due to take exams in 2021 will have experienced considerable disruption to their education this year, and we are committed to doing all we can to minimise the effects of this. Exams will take place next year, and we're working with Ofqual and the exam boards on our approach to these. While these are the first steps, they are the best way to ensure all children can get back into the classroom as soon as possible. I want to end by thanking the childcare, school and FE staff who have gone above and beyond over the past 8 weeks and who are now working so incredibly hard to welcome our children and young people back, while also continuing to support those who remain at home. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary for advance sight of his statement. And I join him in thanking parents and all those working in education and childcare at this difficult time. For weeks, head teachers, education unions, school staff and many parents have warned that the plan to open whole primary schools before the summer was simply impractical while implementing social distancing safely. So I welcome the Secretary's decision to roll back from that today. However, I must state my dismay at the way this has been handled. If the government had brought together everyone involved in implementing these plans from the outset and really taken on board what they had to say, they would not be in the situation of having to roll back at all. But what's done is done. And now it is imperative the government looks ahead to what the education system needs over the coming months and years. Children and young people's education and well-being will have been impacted cruelly by such a prolonged period away from school. Their friends and the situation at home may have been extremely stressful. Indeed, the Children's Commissioner has said to me today, "The risk I am most concerned about is that of a generation of children losing over 6 months of formal education, socialising with friends and structured routine. I'm also concerned about a deepening education disadvantage gap that could leave millions of children without education they need to progress in life. The government need to face up to the scale of damage this is doing to children and scale up their response. The starting point for this needs to be the rapid action to support summer schemes for this summer. Like the Commissioner, I believe a crisis in education and children's attainment and well-being could come at us incredibly quickly if we do not step in and mitigate it now. There needs to be a national plan for education. So will the Secretary commit today to bringing together children's organisations, trade unions, parents' associations, health and psychological experts, Ofqual, school leaders and head teachers to develop that plan. Of course, the Secretary will say he has met with these groups. However, politely listening to concerns and not acting on most of them is very different to the creation of a formal task force where these groups play a key role in setting the principles of a national plan. In the immediate term, will the Secretary consider issuing guidance that all children of compulsory school age should have a one-on-one meeting with a teacher from their school and parents, if appropriate, before the summer holidays start? Alongside that support, will the Secretary commit to increasing the resources available for summer schemes to help re-engage children socially and emotionally? In terms of academic support, the government must support blended learning with more resources, targeted tuition, significantly increased support for disadvantaged children, including considering a greatly enhanced pupil premium, roll out devices and free access to internet to all pupils who need them. And for those in years 10 and 12 who are worried sick about their exams next year, the government must work with Ofqual to redesign GCSE and A-level qualifications to reflect the impact time away from school has had. Longer term, the plan must cover all possible scenarios, including the possibility of a second wave. Not least, Public Health England confirmed on Friday that the R rate was over 1 in some regions. Indeed, the government has set out that keeping below 1 is critical in stopping the spread of the virus, but the government does not appear to have issued any direction to schools in those regions. So what is the Secretary's safety advice? Should they pause plans for wider reopening? Do they need to take additional measures? Or is it acceptable to simply carry on bringing in additional pupils with an R rate above 1? Of course, the Secretary today infers the latter, that local action does not need to be taken. So I ask him to publish the scientific modelling to support such an assertion and reassure schools in these regions. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has confirmed that the free school meal voucher scheme will not continue over the summer holidays. With 200,000 more children expected to be living below the poverty line by the end of the year as job losses hit family incomes, this is a deeply callous move by the government. Will the Secretary of State change his mind today and commit to funding free school meals over the summer holidays?
Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would hope that the honourable lady opposite and myself are completely united in our concern to making sure that there is not a generation of children that miss out. And we recognise and we understand the truly extraordinary times that we're living in, and we're asking both children to learn in and teachers to teach in and all those who support them. But what we do recognise is that we do need to be bringing schools back and pupils back into the classroom. If it had been left to the honourable lady, she would not have been bringing children back into the classroom until the National Education Union said that she was allowed to do so. And while we will continue to work with all, we recognise how important it is, how incredibly important it is to do the best for every single child. And that's why it's so welcome to see so many schools opening their doors, welcoming children in, and actually giving them the very best of what they can offer. She raises an important point about summer schemes, but I would say that we need to lift our eyes higher and to be more ambitious. She is right to highlight the fact that there are challenges, real challenges that children have suffered as a consequence of this lockdown. But to put this right, we need to take a longer-term approach of how we can support children over a longer period of time. And that is what we will be working towards, and that is what we will be delivering. And yes, we will be working, and we continue to work, with groups and organisations right across the spectrum to make sure that the policies are evidence-based and they are going to deliver for children, because we are not going to be doing virtue signalling. We are going to be taking the actions that are going to make a real improvement and a real difference to children's lives. And she is right to highlight the importance of working with Ofqual, and that is what we're doing, including with representative organisations of schools and teachers, to make sure that those children who are going to be facing exams next year, whether that's at GCSE, whether that's A-level, whether that's T-levels, or whether that's BTECs and other qualifications, to ensure that those exams are fair and reflect their hard work that they've been doing. And the Honourable Lady mentioned the issue of SAGE and their data and Public Health England. That is not something that is within my control, as they are an independent body. SAGE regularly publish all their data that they're doing, and they'll be doing so with reference to this. But in terms of local authorities, right across the country, whether it's in the northwest or whether it's in the northeast, southeast, the southwest, we'll work with all local authorities where they have concerns, work with them and Public Health England so they get the best advice. Because the interests of children, the interests of those who work in schools, are my primary interest and my focus in making sure that we can bring schools back. And of course, we'll work with those local authorities, but we do start to need to bring all schools back in every part of this country. And if the evidence starts to point to the fact that we'll have to close schools down in small clusters as a result of this, then obviously that is the action that we'd take, but only on the best advice from PHE. And at the moment, the advice from PHE and SAGE is that all schools can open and they should open.
We now go to the Chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Why is it that we can turn a blind eye to thousands of demonstrators campaign for pubs and garden centres to open, yet it is so hard to reopen our schools? We know that around 700,000 disadvantaged children are not doing school homework, and 700,000 don't have proper access to computers for the internet. So what is the government doing to help these disadvantaged children learn again and avoid an epidemic of educational poverty? Can we have a long-term plan for education for a catch-up premium to look after these left-behind children? And will he also reconsider ensuring that these children get free school meals over the summer, given the financial anxieties their families have to face during the current pandemic?
Secretary of State.
Well, my right honourable friend will be aware that we're already in the process of rolling out IT equipment right across the school estate, as well as to those children who are most vulnerable. 100,000 of those laptops have already been distributed to children who are most vulnerable and most disadvantaged. And we took the decision to ensure that they were prioritised over and above schools, those children who have social workers. We've got a further 75,000 computers that are going to be distributed to schools over the coming weeks, and we're on schedule to distribute the full 230,000 of those computers over the coming month as on schedule. But my right honourable friend is right to highlight the fact that we do need a long-term plan. That is what we're doing. We recognise that the learning loss is not something that is going to be corrected just over a few weeks, but this is an action that needs to be taken over a long period of time, and that's the approach we're taking.
Now go to Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of this statement. Lourdes Secondary in Glasgow tragically lost 2 pupils this week. I'm sure the whole House will join me in offering our condolences to their families, friends and the entire school community at Lourdes. During the urgent question on school reopening last month, I asked the Secretary of State where, with a maximum of 15 pupils per class, the additional rooms and teachers were coming from. He stuck his head in the sand, ignored my questions, the concerns raised by the teaching profession and those of parents. So it's no surprise that we're back here less than 4 weeks later to find that the government's own social distancing rules make it impossible for primary schools in England to admit all pupils before the summer holidays. But why is it taking the government so long to recognise what was blindingly obvious? What is needed now is a proper plan for education, along the lines been developed by the Scottish Government. This should cover all possible scenarios and focus on blended learning with greatly increased support for disadvantaged children. But is he planning, as Scotland has done, to use public buildings such as libraries and council offices to relieve pressure on classroom space? What consultation will take place with the teaching profession to ensure the government's plans for reopening are realistic? Will he commit to publishing modelling of the increased number of COVID cases that could potentially be seen in school-based staff as a result of reopening the schools? And finally, will he ensure that any decisions taken are based on published scientific advice and with the agreement of local councils and school leaders, rather than simply forcing through what has been described as delivering the impossible?
Secretary of State.
Well, I very much join with the Honourable Lady in passing on my deep condolences, not just to the families, but to the schools and the communities that have lost loved ones, as she highlighted at the start of her question. We will continue to work with teachers' unions as well as school representative organisations as we look to expand the number of children who are able to attend primary schools, as well as we continue with the expansion of more pupils attending schools, including years 10 and 12, and those in further education colleges, which will be starting from the week commencing the 15th of June next week. And as we welcome more children into the classroom, as we welcome more children having the opportunity to learn in different year groups, we'll see the real benefit of how the children are able to have that opportunity to be with their teachers, be with their friends once more. Now, the Honourable Lady is right to highlight the fact that we do have limitations of, while we have a limit of 15 children per class, that obviously does limit the amount of ability to have as many year groups in school as we'd like. But as this is changed and as this is modified, this will give us the ability to slowly and cautiously move forward in terms of welcoming more children back to school when that is the right time.
Tim Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every 2 months represents more than 1% of a child's childhood. And come September, many children would have been out of school for almost 6 months, and we fear it may be even longer. And the impact on those from the most deprived backgrounds will be considerable. So can I ask the Secretary of State, therefore, that he looks at catch-up schemes over the summer, perhaps using NTS youth workers who've been stood down from the summer programme, and over the next year looks at mobilising the many students who are now delaying going to university, who will find it hard to travel or hard to get a job, to get them to work alongside some of these children in a national mentoring scheme modelled on the charity City Year, for example.
Secretary of State.
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, and this is certainly what we are looking at, but we're looking at something much more wide and much more long-term, because we don't believe that actually just purely looking at the summer period is enough in order to be able to assist children to get the catch-up that they truly need.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State was talking about the availability of laptops and computer equipment to disadvantaged pupils. 2 months ago, the Secretary of State promised there would be that equipment. Having spoken to my schools this morning, they've not received any. And whilst the government will talk easily about a levelling up agenda, it's quite clear where private schools have access to that sort of equipment, as do their staff, it is not available in our state sector. So is it the case then that the public rightly believes that the government is failing them?
Secretary of State.
Well, I do apologise to the honourable gentleman. He's obviously not heard my response that I had made a little bit earlier, because where I'd explained that we'd taken a policy decision to ensure that the laptops, the first wave of laptops that we're to receive, were going to be targeted at those children who were most vulnerable and had a social worker. And the second wave of laptops that we have just been in receipt in were then going to schools and academies through local authorities or multi-academy trusts. We're on schedule to receive all of those laptops and get them distributed by the end of the month. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank ComputerServe, who have done so much work in making sure that these have been distributed in this manner.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you. I want to thank the Secretary of State for enabling some primary school children to go back to school last week, not least because I'm a father of a 4-year-old who was desperate to get back to school, has enjoyed the education and that well-being that she needed. I'm sure I speak for many parents across the country with that. Teachers in North Norfolk have been phenomenal in their efforts of getting students and little children back to school. What reassurances can you give, though, however, for those vulnerable children that can't go back at the moment, who are remote learning, and that they are getting an equitable education so that they don't fall further behind?
Order. Just to say, I do want to try to get everybody in, so quite short questions and short answers would do. Secretary of State.
I share my honourable friend's desire to see all children returning to school in that phased way, but as swiftly as possible as we're able to do so. But my honourable gentleman highlights some really important challenges, especially for those vulnerable children who aren't necessarily able to access education by going into school. I was particularly delighted to see the work and progress that we've made with the Oak National Academy. Just a few days ago, they had delivered over 10 million lessons to children. And as part of that package is lessons and support for children with special educational needs as well.
Make clear.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, a decade ago, I sat in a Cabinet Office briefing room discussing the threat of the then threatened pandemic. And then we were discussing the closure of schools. So it beggars belief that the Secretary of State can come to the House today with no clear plan for getting out the laptops, which are delayed. That wasn't planned in advance. Well, it's late, Secretary of State. He shakes his head, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the record, but they are late. This is already late for vulnerable pupils. And with no clear plan about catch-up. And I find myself in complete accord with the honourable members for Harlow and